Found it. I found it. It is under user, not channel. That was what confused me.
Okay, in theory, I think we're streaming.
But my nose itches now.
But I have no video. I'm not sending any video at the moment.
Then what is the point of that? I'm sure there's a point, but I don't understand it.
Audio. one thing at a time. I'm just trying to make sure the stream's working. And then I can see if I can get OBS to cooperate.
So, Tim, I pasted in a few, hopefully relevant links into the chat a little bit ago. So feel free to compliment those.
Okay.
So where are you based?
I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, but we've been here in Nashville, Tennessee for almost 20 years now.
Oh, wow. Not too far.
Yeah, I was going to say, you guys are outside of or in the metro Atlanta region. Is that correct?
Yep. We are a little bit north of Atlanta, Woodstock.
Mm-hmm. How about the I-85 collapse? Did that affect you guys in any way?
Luckily, I work from home and I don't have to get into downtown too often.
Yeah.
I know Jonathan works in Marietta.
Yeah, thankfully it hasn't been a big deal for me either, but I know for some people it's been a complete disaster.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's been very dramatic.
So I think we're streaming and recording and all that good stuff.
No way. Let me see if the new... Yep, cool. The new one shows up.
Of course, I'm capturing my entire screen, which leaves me with only one screen to look at everything else. But, okay. Move some windows around. Skype has failed me again.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm ready when you guys are.
All right, cool. Let me say something over in the other room. All right, and then back to the other one. Okay. Okay, I have enough windows open. Hold on. And I gotta move. See, if I had the windows in the wrong place, then what happens is I'll end up, I've got 3 monitors and, I end up looking that way.
Yeah, and then we can't hear you. Yeah, and when you turn your head, you go to, your level drops to nothing.
That's weird that it was so dramatically different for you. Like, because I'm using apps that, do the auto level.
Oh, yeah.
Skype or whatever. And it's, I've just been able to leave it there forever. But anyway, let's get started. So, hey, everybody in the chat room. It has been a while since we've had a live show, as you probably noticed. We actually get, Jonathan, wouldn't you say that we get asked about new shows on the order of once a week or every other week? I think people...
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, on Facebook, there have been some people chatting with us in the Slack room. So we hear you, and we're on this. Why are we doing this on Friday? I don't remember why we decided Friday. Do you?
I think it was just a weird scheduling issue.
Because I know I was going out of town, and then anyway. But I'm actually traveling less. I just changed jobs. I mean, I'm traveling next week, and I was traveling last week and the week before that. But I actually am traveling less now. There was just a clump of them, and one of them was a vacation, so that one didn't count.
Yeah, cruise. That's an allowed travel. That's
So,
Stacy approved.
yes, that was a lot of fun. Tim, have you ever been on a cruise before?
No, that's a not yet. Don Jones was strongly encouraging me to join the PowerShell cruise,
Mm-hmm.
but did that actually happen last year, or is that still upcoming later this year?
I do not remember.
Yeah, I haven't heard or seen anything about
that they
it
were
lately.
doing one, but I haven't heard about it lately. But anyway, I highly recommend going on a cruise.
I eat enough food though as it is. From what I understand, cruises are just eating 24/7. I don't think I'd be able to get off the ship at the end of the event.
Yeah, I mean, basically, find things to do, and you're not, as long as you just keep your meal times, to normal, it works out. So, okay, so let's go ahead and start this off. Everybody in the chat room, thank you for showing up on a Friday night. I know it's a little out of the ordinary, but if you do want to interact with us and ask questions of our guest, whom we will introduce in a moment, then please chat along with us, and we will weave that in the conversation. So tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to have with us Tim Warner. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hi. Thank you very much for having me, guys. It's an honor. I've been listening to you for a long time, and it's a trip to actually be here with you.
Well, I saw that you were on Run As Radio not too long ago. I love Richard. He does a great job on his show. So we'll mention links and things where people can find you at the end of the show. But I just want to mention that because you're making the rounds, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
So why don't we start like we usually do when people are new to the show? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. Well, I'm from Syracuse, New York originally, so I grew up with lots of snow. And by the time I got finished with high school and was into college, I thought I wanted to become a physician. But really, of course, I'd been a computer geek for as long as I can remember. I mean, we're talking, let's see, the TRS-80 Model 3, the Commodore 64, the Timex Sinclair T1000, or the ZX81 in Europe, I guess. But college, the doctor thing turned out to be as simple as much as I like the hard sciences, I really wasn't that good at it. So I didn't get into med school. I fell back on, well, I've always liked teaching. Maybe I can try teaching. And this led to a number of fits and starts. And eventually I worked at a mom and pop computer store, doing really what I like the most, playing with technology and sharing knowledge. And that is what, back in 1997, got me into IT, and it's been a great match ever since.
So I want to stop you right there for a second and say, like, yes, I mean, everybody needs to do that. Yeah. I've got a similar path, and I'm sure, Jonathan and many of the people listening do as well. It's like, once you find that thing that you love doing, hopefully it pays some money, but I mean, that's the one that you want to go focus on and do. Get better and, so good job there. So where did you go from there? You got into it.
I got in with a training company called Executrain, which I don't even know if they're still around now. They were based in Atlanta, just doing end user training. And that's where I really, like you said, I realized that I discovered my professional passion, the blending of IT and training, sharing knowledge. And so between 97 and now, I've ping-ponged back and forth between full-time training and full-time industry. Of course, I always want to make sure I'm relevant with the actual tech.
Right.
But for the last handful of years, it's pretty much been all teaching. I work full-time for Pluralsight now, doing computer-based training. And the reason why I guess I popped up on your radar recently is in large part thanks to my boss, Don Jones, because coincidentally or not, working for Don at Pluralsight and hanging out with a lot of people that you guys both know really well, like Jason Helmick and Jeff Hicks and all of these people, they're really great mentors. And so they've helped introduce me into the world of presenting and working at user groups and with user groups, speaking at conferences, and just doing more out and about, kind of making the rounds, like what you said earlier.
Yeah. And it's kind of, once you get into it, it kind of feeds on itself. You know, if you write a book, that leads to this. You do some training, this leads to that. You speak at these conferences, you're invited back to these others. So I found that, once you got rolling, it's easy to kind of keep a momentum going.
Yeah, it is a building a snowball kind of thing. I agree. Yeah, I feel just especially fortunate because I am doing my professional passion, and like you said earlier, it pays really well, and I'm never hurting for work. I often tell people that, in my opinion, you really can't go wrong with either information technology or one of the medical sciences, the medical fields. That's especially true here in Nashville. Huge medical complex and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, what is it like working for Don Jones?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it took some getting used to because Don, you know him, he's like a machine. And at first, he comes across as a little bit abrupt, in his personality because he's so analytical and so intelligent. But what I've discovered, and what I'm sure you guys have discovered, is outside that armor-plated titanium shell is a marshmallow. He's an incredibly sweet and caring guy. So I'm sounding like a Don Jones fan number one. I probably am because he's done great things for my career and for me personally.
I think I'm number two.
Yeah.
From way back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've got a VB script book signed by him somewhere.
Yeah, that was how I first learned of him myself when he was doing scripting answers. I remember sitting there listening to him, and I'm thinking, this guy really knows how to teach, and he's got a really nice voice. It was easy to listen to him as well. And it's weird how things turn out. Now we work together, and we talk every day.
Awesome. So, what's been at what point did you start using PowerShell and really get into it? I was doing Googling your name a little bit earlier, and I saw blog posts, back in 2015. I don't know if there was before that, but you're not new to it, obviously. And you've got a book out, and we'll talk about all that.
Yeah, it's been a slow, gradual thing. I have a lot of friends, and maybe you guys are the same way, that were with it right from the very beginning. Monad, I was aware of the language from the very beginning, but it didn't cross my radar as something I wanted to dive into until, say, the last handful of years. I mean, the time that I'd been in industry, the last gig I had was at a private high school here in Nashville, and that's where I really started relying on scripting automation, and it was VB script primarily. It's probably why I was listening to Don. But PowerShell was on the horizon, and it was intriguing to me because I've always been a command line person. I'm comfortable with, the old batch MS-DOS shell and the old batch commands. And VB script always struck me as, well, a little cumbersome. So I immediately was attracted to the standardized syntax of PowerShell. So it's been, getting from the shallow end of the pool deeper and deeper and deeper to where now I use it in my work, even as a Pluralsight author. It's a wonderful tool, as you know. If you do anything 2 times or more, that's definitely something that should be automated. And now that I know a bit about the language, I can figure it out. And there I have a tool that saves me some time. So it's just become a nice part of my working life.
So there is and I'm sure everybody's probably seen, like, there's a graph that kind of makes fun of how long it takes somebody to do something, and then how long it takes you automate it, and you see the lines intersecting like that. I forget where I saw this. This was a while back, but I saw somebody who was basically challenging that and saying, well, you didn't think about the maintenance of the script and the time it takes you to research some weird API and. I wonder if you thought about that. It's like, especially you're like, okay, well, wait a second, I've got to write tests, unit tests now. And, at some point, is there like a happy medium that you found or that you've talked to people about when you're, in your training?
Sure. Yeah. 2 things come to mind. One is, I would say to this person, are you in the right field? Because if you really enjoy IT half as much as I do, then you don't mind the research, and the puzzle aspect of it is one of the biggest joy points for me in scripting automation or any kind.
I do agree. I am. We are your people. Don't get me wrong. Thank you for. We've got posted in the show in the chat room now.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Well,
it doesn't scale. Clicking does not scale. Right.
Of course.
Sure, exactly. You can automate something, and maybe it's faster to to manually go touch 3 machines or 5 machines. But if you've got 500 or 5,000 or 50,000, no,
Right.
you're not clicking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. But the other thing I was thinking of, and this applies, I think, not only to repetitive tasks and wanting to automate it, but any professional endeavor, is to try to avoid getting caught up in perfectionism. That's something I see at Pluralsight a lot when I'm working with new authors, for instance, who sometimes never get off the ground building a course, let's say, because they're so obsessed with trying to get it right the first time. And I think that same paradigm applies to script making. You can spin yourself into the wall just trying to get things perfect out of the gate. I'm much more boots on the ground practical. It's just like, give it your best effort and then iterate. That's my take on it.
That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, for example, somebody brand new to scripting and they don't know what a function is. They don't know what functional programming is. They're going to write it like an old basic script, you know. That's okay. I mean, you know, there's nothing wrong with doing that until you get the hang of it. You don't have to wait until you've learned functional programming, you know, to write a big, giant, you know, monster, you know, script with, you know, jobs and inventing and all that.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. I think it's a expression in Buddhism, but it's probably many other places. Start where you are. And then once you've gained a little ground, I mean, I'm speaking directly out of my experience with PowerShell, because, you know, being around the community, they don't have to be necessarily a rock star like a Jason Helmick, but anybody who's using the shell knows one more thing that I do, and then I've got a new tool in my tool belt. Why don't I try this? And it builds in a very satisfying way. I know I'm doing things now that maybe were inconceivable to me just a couple years ago.
Okay, this is I don't know what his name is. Maybe his name is Jared, because I'm clicking through on the chat here. Jared posted both of the links that I was thinking of, you know, the cartoon. So we've got the geeks and repetitive tasks, showing that intersection. And then the second one is an XKCD article, which talks about that, you know, how much time you're spending versus how much time you're saving. Yeah. So just, you know, as your knowledge progresses, you're going to be able to do more in a short amount of time. So just, you know, just don't bite off everything at once and you'll be fine.
Yep.
So that's good. So, why don't you take us through some of the things that you've been working on or are passionate about lately, and we'll just kind of meander through there, unless there's something specific you wanted to.
Yeah, sure.
Cover. I didn't listen to your run-as show, so I don't want to do that.
Well, those are the stuff that I've done with Richard. I've done 2 meetings with him. They were one-off topics, really. The first one was on Wireshark and packet capture and protocol analysis, and the second one was on open source PowerShell, which is actually an interesting subject in itself. But I've been specializing in the Azure public cloud over the last year and change. And that certainly has as much to do with PowerShell as any other technology.
Sure. So about Azure. So, I mean, have you compared it, or do you do much work at all with AWS or others? Do you find yourself drawn back to Azure, or, you know, the things that you would rather do there than elsewhere?
Yeah, I have to confess, as much as I love AWS, and I give Amazon infinite credit for their innovation. And I hope I don't put my MVP status at jeopardy by saying this, but my observation has always been that in many ways over the last few years, AWS will innovate, and then mysteriously that same functionality appears in Azure Resource Manager. And that's great. I mean, I'm not complaining, but that kind of transference seems to have been a trend. But as I said, as much as I love AWS, maybe it's the fact that I'm a Microsoft specialist. I'm just naturally more comfortable in the Azure world. It's pretty clear to me that AWS was developed by and for Linux developers. And as Jerry Seinfeld says, not that there's anything wrong with that. But again, being a Microsoft specialist, I find myself just more at home in the Azure ecosystem. But with PowerShell, and that's an interesting topic, I found that the PowerShell support in AWS, am I going to just go ahead and say I think it's better than Azure's? In some ways it is. It's a single monolithic model. as opposed to breaking them out like Azure does. I like the break apart mode, but if you've ever worked with the AWS commandlets, they're all documented thoroughly. The documentation in Azure is still very sparse, and they're powerful, well-written, well-thought-out commands. And I didn't get a chance to meet him, but the person who wrote that module for Amazon was at Summit. Was it last week? I've got my days all discombobulated.
Yeah, it was last week.
This week. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, whenever it was, he was there. I didn't get a chance to meet him. I wanted to thank him for his work because it's good stuff.
So was this Steve Roberts by chance? He was the guy we had on the podcast forever ago.
I don't know.
I just did some Googling just for others who might be listening along. Episode 255 was when we had Steve Roberts on to talk about the AWS SDK and PowerShell module.
Yeah, that must be him then.
And then episode 317 related with Chris Smith to talk about the Google Cloud tools for PowerShell. And kind of to your point, like they do great work, but you know, I distinctly recall when we were talking to the Google guy, Chris, that he was, I want to say he was one of the only teams or the first team doing .NET work in Google, period.
Yeah, I think that was right.
I remember that part of the conversation. He was like, yeah, we had to build all our own build tools and, you know, automation. Like,
no surprise there.
Take advantage of, you know, we're rolling it on our own.
Yeah, you're definitely not the first person on the show either to say that they prefer the AWS support over the Azure support from a PowerShell perspective. Tim, does AWS have anything like Azure Automation?
Maybe Lambda.
Yeah, Lambda is their serverless function as a service that's analogous to Azure functions. The AWS has CloudFormation, which is the declarative template-based thing. So we're getting closer. The answer I know is yes, but I just can't remember the service name off the top of my head.
Well, you just named two right there, so we're right in that neighborhood. And yeah, we have a confirmation from the chat room that it was Steve, the same guy that was at the summit last this week.
Cool.
So that's cool. So I think your plural site work, do you focus on anything in particular there? Are you doing a lot of Azure work for them?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, and I'll make it short. There's the question that I think a lot of IT people have about specialization versus generalization. And some say it's better for my career to really deep dive into a single aspect of IT. And then once you start getting into the conference circuit and publishing, again, that question becomes even more so. Are you going to be the PowerShell guru? More to the point, are you going to be a DSC guru? What is your specialty? Although I have a good attention span, I find that I get a little bored if I'm too siloed. So I've always been a generalist. And that comes into play in my career, really. That, for instance, Pluralsight, and then before Pluralsight, I did a lot of training for CBT Nuggets. I've done a lot of computer-based training over the last 15 years or so. And it goes across the board pretty crazily. It goes from Oracle database to MySQL to SQL Server, Windows Server, Mac OS Server, Linux administration. So it's nice that I'm so interested in different technologies because it's given me a lot of exposure and the ability to teach on a lot. But like I said, over the last year and change, it's kind of collapsed down into Azure because that's become a pressing need from Microsoft themselves and also just in the world, whether it's somebody wanting to certify on Azure or just needing to get their sea legs and understand, for instance, the difference between service management and resource manager. So that's where I've been. Where things will go from here, I'm not exactly sure. I may wind up going back to Oracle database for a little while. We'll have to see. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there's people in the chat room who are like, no, don't do that. Yeah, they're scary company, but I love them, right?
If you say so, man. I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I my experience hands-on with Oracle is quite limited. I just recall that at one point I was working in a lab and we had to configure just a vast array of different types of software. It was a security R&D lab. And we had the one guy who was the only one who would touch any of the Oracle stuff, and everybody else was like, no, well, let's give it to Brad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty crazy world. Companies like SAP and Oracle, I just always think of the great white shark, and not just from a capitalist standpoint, how the business behaves, but even their software, the super protective licensing. And with Oracle database, it's easy. I've seen companies get bitten because you can download any of the Oracle database servers for free and start turning on features and using them, and then realize, oh, wait a minute, we owe tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of licensing now if we're going to continue using this the way it is, because we've already flipped all these switches from off to on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the biggest capitalist in the world, and I could go on at great length on perhaps a different podcast. But I at the same time, I love the community, and I love open, and I love open source software. So there's a balance that it's like way over on the other side that I don't appreciate.
And I was going to say it might have something to do with some members of the free and open source community. Of course, Oracle's not open source itself, but just to that notion of community, and to bring it back to PowerShell for a moment, I absolutely love the PowerShell community. You guys do as well, obviously. And that really comes to the forefront, for instance, when I attend a PowerShell user group here in Nashville or wherever, and certainly at PowerShell Summit. I think I love the community so much because it seems like almost everybody is willing to contribute and help. And there's not that sense of territory and us versus them. I mean, some Linux people, unfortunately, tend to be kind of like that. But I don't get that in the PowerShell community at all. And with the new Microsoft embracing open source, it's even more to the good, I would say.
Yeah, Satya Nadella has certainly turned the company into something different and much better, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you find yourself spending a lot of time with PowerShell version 6, using it on Windows boxes, or do you use it from Linux boxes or Macs, or what are you using open source PowerShell for?
Well, I wouldn't think it's the last I used it, which was maybe a month ago or so. It still seems to be pretty alpha.
Okay.
I haven't installed it on Windows yet, but I've run it on my Mac. I have an iMac at home, and I've run it on a couple different distributions of Linux. What do I think about it? Well, I wish I had a crystal ball to really have a clear picture of Microsoft's vision for it. I mean, on one hand, you think of DSC possibilities. That's pretty clear. The ability to manage Linux machines, whether it's onboarding into System Center or OMS in the Azure cloud. There's lots of good use cases for it. I think a weaker argument might be telling a Linux administrator, hey, you can use the same command shell on both Linux and Windows machines. I don't think many Linux administrators care too much about that.
Right.
But certainly the other side, here in Nashville at Vanderbilt, for instance, I have many friends who work there, and I used to be a systems administrator there. There's a large Linux presence, and I can definitely see the ability to manage Linux machines using the consistent PowerShell syntax cross-platform is going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I like the idea, but culturally, it's going to be a hard sell. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, with the Bash shell language being so prevalent and having been around so long, somebody's going to say, what does this PowerShell thing offer me that I can't already do with my existing Bash shell scripts?
So was this discussed at all at the PowerShell Summit?
Yeah, it was, but unfortunately, those discussions and sessions took place before I got there.
Okay.
I missed the main event that I was personally interested in is hanging out with meeting everybody, of course, and I did meet a lot of people, but I wanted to see the product team. And that day, and where they discussed PowerShell v6, that took place on Monday. It was a day that I wasn't there. Let's put it that way. And they did some recording. There were some glitches with the recording system. I hope that session was captured. I'll ask clicked on Monday, I guess. But I hope it was.
And I wonder too how much it matters if PowerShell is adopted by the Linux community, because now that it's open sourced, I know that they're getting input from the community, from the PowerShell community, to help make the product better. And if it ends up being, primarily used on Windows and it still continues to evolve and get better, does it matter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like now that the PowerShell engine is open sourced, it's being largely decoupled from the Windows operating system releases. You know, how we normally expect a major release with each Windows version release. And with it being out of band and maintained, looks like mostly out of band. I think that gives the PowerShell team a lot more flexibility. And that's something else to their great credit. There was a lot of involvement that I saw among PowerShell team members and team leaders at Summit. Even side breakout sessions, for instance. I led a pop-up session on one of those days on PowerShell gotchas, trying to get some more input from the community on that. You know, the Git book, the big book of PowerShell gotchas that's online. And there's some guys showed up and we're having a really great conversation. And Kenneth Hansen was sitting a couple tables away and he started chiming in too. So there was just this transparent, and he was very receptive because we're talking about gotchas. So we're talking about elements of the language that are annoying.
Right, yeah.
And we wish we're different. And he was super receptive to those discussions and he was taking notes. I mean, it was really impressive.
It's amazing that the people on the PowerShell team, that so many of them are still doing that, on the PowerShell team. You think about like, people have jobs for a long time and some people hop around a lot. I'm more of the hop around kind of person. And, I've been at my current employer 5 years and I've had, I think 4 jobs in those 5 years. But, like the guys on the PowerShell team, not all of them, but a lot of them have been there, some since the beginning and most of them for 5+ years.
Yeah. At last year's summit, they did the same thing this year, but they did a lightning demo where a number of the PowerShell team members would just one at a time get up and do a quick little demo of what they're working on currently. Mm-hmm. And the 2 things that stood out to me last year, I missed it this year, of course, were one, how young most of these people were. Yeah. I mean, oh boy, I'm thinking these are kids. Some of these could be my sons or daughters. I'm getting old. That was one thing. And the other thing is I look over on the other side of the crowded room and I see Bruce Payette, co-inventor of the language, sitting there. And he was just sitting there, watching. And it was just, again, touching. I might have been reading into it, but it seemed like he probably is a mentor figure to these developers. But here's the guy who invented the language, observing his teammates, just showing off and being proud of what they're doing with the language. It was really moving, and I'm sure it was the same way this year.
Yep, definitely agreed.
Yeah.
So what else do we need to talk about? What else have you been up to? And we'll just kind of go through a couple more topics and round out the show.
Let's see. What else to discuss?
You have a book.
I've got something I want to ask you about. Mm-hmm. Now that PowerShell is, in version 5, version 6, version 5.1, we're in that kind of era, and we've got DSC and we've got, Pester and all this stuff. As a trainer, when you are getting somebody started learning PowerShell, the breadth is so much wider than it used to be. What's your methodology for covering that?
Well, of course, first of all, it depends on at what level I'm teaching. Like,
sure.
Go back in time a couple months. I did a course, fundamentals course on Azure IaaS. And so, of course, I'm not just going to show how to accomplish various tasks like creating a virtual machine or building a virtual network in the Azure web portal. I do show that. But I also make it clear at the outset that it's not optional, and it hasn't been optional for a while now, for you to know how to do these administrative tasks programmatically. So I give time to both PowerShell as well as the CLI. Azure has a separate command line interface like AWS does. And, as a trainer, I'm always about linking content. So if I don't have the scope to start right at the very beginning with like get command, get help, and get member, I'll simply point the learner to the best resources I can think of, which off the top of my head, of course, the foundational book would be A Month of Lunches book that
Right.
Don and Jeff wrote. And for video training, geez, there's some really good stuff right in the Pluralsight library. My friend Michael Bender has a course, I think it's called either Fundamentals or Getting Started with PowerShell, where he does start at the very beginning. That's a well-received course because he's a good teacher. But there it's just about building and just speaking, speaking in as real world a way as possible. I mean, because the waters get very deep very quickly, like you mentioned, with current IT focusing on this continuous integration, continuous delivery, DevOps methodology. The waters get pretty deep and the waves get pretty high for a systems administrator who realizes, my career depends on me learning this PowerShell thing. But meanwhile, I've always been afraid of math, and the idea of programming gives me nightmares. What the heck do I do now? So there, we just want to gently take them in and say, look at this command here, get help. You've got a verb, and there's a list of 90 something standard verbs that you'll get used to and get really familiar with and get comfortable with. There's a dash, there's some kind of prefix that tells you the family of command that we're talking about. If it's Azure Resource Manager, it's going to be Azure RM something. And then there's some singular noun. And you're going to see patterns develop and blah, 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 blah. You start building, and then before you know it, they've got some confidence, and they're starting to, build pipelines and eventually functions, and then who knows, maybe modules. And then they're thinking of testing and looking into this pester thing. And then before you know it, they're talking about Git and source control and build pipelines. And it's a gradual climb. But I submit it's like any other learning curve. It's steep at the beginning, but once you start making connections and you start getting confidence, boy, your skill set just starts ramping up exponentially. That's been my experience as a trainer.
There's an interesting
question in the chat that I was going to just pitch right at you. Mm-hmm. At what stage do you guys reach that comfort level of I can explore on my own with PowerShell?
I think an initial benchmark is when you get the Holy Trinity, 3 commandlets. When you get a grasp on get command for discovery, get help for documentation, particularly examples, and get member to see the kind of things you can pull, properties and methods primarily. Once you're at that point, you've pretty much got your flight wings, because you can apply those 3 commandlets to any context, whether it's Windows Client, Windows Server, SharePoint Server, SQL Server, AWS, Google Cloud, now Linux, potentially being able to run get process on a CentOS Linux machine to see processes. No more of this PS AUX nonsense.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that is piping stuff out to format list star. Mm-hmm. Because then you can see, because sometimes, get member is awesome, right, but sometimes the name of the property isn't enough information. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I really need to see it to say, oh, okay, well, that's exactly what I want. And that property is called, whatever. And then I'm off to the races. But yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Once you start getting comfortable, I think you need to wrap your head around the concept of objects. Once you have that concept, and you've piped some stuff to get member, and then you can start seeing, oh, okay, well, now I can explore, right? If you're in WMI or Active Directory or whatever, then you can start, using get commandlets and then piping them to get member to figure out, okay, well, what can I do? And I think once you get to a point where that feels natural, then to me, that's really the, I can go explore on my own stage.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, once you get to viewing properties and methods, then you're at variables and dot notation, which looks frighteningly like any other object-oriented programming language that you might have seen. And that's going to build you into functions and logic, if, while, for, whatever. And then it just builds. Yeah, exactly.
And then eventually you get in the weeds, and you're like, well, I have no idea how to do this. And you start Googling around and figure it out. And, your learning just progresses from there.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be willing to put yourself in a position where you don't know how to do something and be able to do, okay, I don't know how to accomplish this in PowerShell. I'm not going to give up until I figure it out. And sometimes that hole can be very deep and very scary, especially when you're getting started. But, the results are obviously very worth it.
Yeah, I've had bad experiences with reaching out with Oracle. Here we go, bringing up Oracle again. But reaching out for help in Oracle community forums, and just getting bashed, just getting unnecessary comments. Yeah, like why are you asking such a ridiculous question? It's like, oh boy, I think I made a mistake. And again, maybe I have whatever color the PowerShell logo color is. I'm colorblind. I'll just call it blue. I might have blue tinted glasses on, but I've had the exact opposite response, I should say, when I reach out for help with PowerShell, whether it's in person, email, Slack, or say the PowerShell.org forums, which is a good place to go. That's how I met Richard Sidaway. If my memory serves, I was asking for help in building a function to do system uptime. And he not only answered the question, but provided a sample script and everything. It was really nice.
Yep, Richard's a very helpful guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So's Joel Bennett. For years and years and years and
allocate, time to listen, and maybe put your fingers halfway in your ears to cut the volume. Love you, Joel.
He's probably answering a question in IRC right now.
Probably. I'm scrolling through the list of your Pluralsight courses, and there's 50 of them.
Yeah,
there's
50. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm able to produce quickly, my colleague Greg Shields is the same way, is that I've never worked off of a transcript. Some of my colleagues, write out everything they're going to say. Talk about the opposite of automation and burning extra cycles. I just teach, and then I spend time editing, of course. And there's been a very few times where I've had to patch something, but if you have to patch something, you have to patch something. It's one of the great beauties of computer training as opposed to printing a book. It's horrible to write a book, have it printed, and then you see a problem in the text that's going to be embedded in that edition forever. Yuck.
So what is your mindset then when you record? Do you have an audience in your mind that you're teaching? Or do you have like a specific type of student that you're trying to focus your message to? How does that work in your mind?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I was thinking of that just the other day, because at Summit I had a lot of people come up to me and say, I really enjoyed your training for Pluralsight, and boy, that's so satisfying, and it feels so good to hear, and I've told some people this at Summit, when I'm sitting in my little office, my little dungeon as I like to call it, sometimes it feels like I'm teaching into the void. If I think of anybody, I maybe think of one person. I used to years ago imagine that I was in a class, because I've done a lot of stand-up training as well, but I find that I think I have a better result if I'm teaching, imagining I'm sitting next to an individual, and that person is whatever skill level I'm targeting, and we're just working together. And I've got my lesson storyboarded out in PowerPoint, so it's not like I'm just riffing off the top of my head, but it's largely just spontaneous teaching. It's meant to be non-threatening, non-intimidating, and maybe a little funny in parts with dry geek humor. But approachable, I think, above all else.
Yeah, I like that approach, and I think that it's important to not go overboard on planning that outline, because then it's going to sound like you're reading something. Anyway, people have different styles, and some people can nail it, but to me, it's like a wooden type of thing, and I don't want to go anywhere near there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Those are the courses that usually put me to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good cure for insomnia, if nothing else. kind of stuff. But some people are able to do the best of both worlds where they script it, but it doesn't come across as scripted. Some of my friends do that, and I've said, boy, I'm amazed. I never would have guessed that you read off a transcript. So, like you said, I guess it just depends on the individual and their skill set and their approach and what they're most comfortable with.
Definitely. So, where should what are you active on lately, and where should we send people who want to follow along some of your exploits and
Okay.
paths?
Lately, Pluralsight's been in a partnership with the Azure marketing and development teams. We've been doing training that Microsoft is publishing directly at azure.com. So one place you could go, and it's free too, because the training's in front of our paywall, is to just go to azure.com under partner or education. It's one of the main links off the site. And you can get to, I do IT Pro stuff, and my colleague Scott Allen has a couple development courses there. And so that's a good place to start. If you're a Pluralsight member, of course, you can just find my name there. My Twitter handle is TechTrainerTim. I did have a blog going, azuredepot.com, but it's really, I haven't had time to update it, so it's pretty much just sitting there. I've got maybe 2 or 3 articles. I don't even know why I mention it. Of course, LinkedIn, you could find me there. And finally, my personal website is techtrainertim.com. There, I've got my books there and contact form.
So what have you
how
written
many
about?
books? Thank you. That's what I was asking.
It's in the neighborhood of 11 or 12.
Oh, good Lord. What are you, Ed Wilson?
Yeah. Of course, Ed and Teresa were both at Summit, too. They received Lifetime Achievement Awards.
Oh, I wish I had been there for that.
Yeah, it was good. They're in really good spirits. They're happy down in Florida. They're having a really great time.
Seems
They're
like
tired.
I follow them.
Yeah.
Follow their exploits on Facebook. So
Ed is growing his hair out really, really long. And Teresa says he looks like Bozo the Clown. But he says that he's going to do a samurai ponytail. He wants his hair long enough to where he can bunch it above his head. And I believe he's going to do this.
oh,
Tie a samurai
He's going
ponytail.
to have a top knot.
I can't wait to
Right.
see a picture of that.
But
So-
to answer your question about the books, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of soured on traditional books nowadays. I'm pretty sure I'm going to write something on Azure, but it's going to be through LeanPub, like
Okay.
Don and Adam Bertram and those guys have been doing. It just makes more sense because, like I said earlier, the idea of committing something to a printed page in tech, that doesn't work. With something moving fast like PowerShell or Azure, forget about it.
Yeah, it was a little different when a version of a product would come out, and then it would be 3 years before that thing revved.
Yeah, absolutely. Nowadays, in fact, the first book I wrote was in 1999. It was on the Windows NT MCSE certification exams. And I swear that book hadn't been on the shelves for more than months before Microsoft basically, I think they were going to retire all the NT exams because it was time for Windows 2000 server. So it's like, what the heck is the point here? You put this work into this book that becomes irrelevant months. Nowadays, it probably could be weeks.
How many copies of that book do you have in your house right now?
Geez, probably a few. That I might
I've
actually.
got 3 or 4 in my office of my book.
Yeah.
not far from where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I just have the one. I don't have 11.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They're probably not worth the paper that, well, not your books, but mine probably aren't worth the paper that they're printed on now, at least those early ones. They're, if nothing else, it'll bring back good memories or bad memories, depending upon how you feel about NT4.
Monitor stands. That's what tech books are great for.
Mm-hmm.
The older
there
ones.
you go. Yep.
Not mine. You need to read mine.
Yep.
I tease. So awesome. So you've had a kind of a great set of contributions to the PowerShell world. So thanks a lot
Thank you.
for that. And I'm glad we could have you on. Before we let you go, though, we have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a question, of course, that we ask everybody who comes onto the podcast. Tim Warner, can you tell us if you have a superhero or a superpower, who would you be and why?
I want to gravitate toward a superpower, and it would be flight, because I've always dreamed of being able to fly like a bird. It's actually a recurring dream that I have sometimes, and it's just the most awesome feeling in the world.
That's a good one. I used to have, it's been a long time, but I remember I used to have a recurring dream, not of flight, but of kind of almost like reduced gravity. Like I could jump around and, soar and go, a football field by jumping. It wasn't quite flight, but that was how I got around in my dreams. And it was like, powerful. That's all.
One of the guys I work with just got one of the newer drones that has a 4K camera, an incredible gimbal. And he was showing me from some video that he took, and it was just astonishing how good it looked. And if you had, some kind of Google Daydream or some kind of VR goggles, you were looking at what the camera was showing, I bet that would feel a lot like you were flying.
Yeah, I can see that.
That would be a very cool experience.
I don't think they would have like the solution to have the bandwidth to stream that.
Well, I know that people do it, and people have races in POV, so it has to be really low latency to make that work.
But those are not going to be 4K cameras in those guys.
No, they're probably not 4K cameras though. But I mean, I think it's only a matter of time where you could do first person view and feel like you were flying, driving a drone around.
Yeah, that's actually kind of cool.
Have you guys tested the HoloLens, or have you used the Oculus Rift? I haven't used any yet.
I have done the HTC Vive, is that what it's called? And the HoloLens. I've done demos of both of them.
I've done all three.
Well, what do you think? The consensus of people I've talked to so far say augmented reality is generally superior to virtual reality. Do you agree?
They're not the same thing.
Okay.
They're not for the same reason. So I don't see that they're necessarily competing in the same space. I mean, in augmented reality, you've not left your room. In virtual reality, you're not where you were. Or you're elsewhere. So it's really not exactly the same thing.
Good point.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the HTC Vive, that experience, because it was good enough that I felt like I was doing what I was doing, even though it was, the graphics were, a little cartoony, but the speed of the response. What's that?
You tilt brush?
No, but Morgan did.
Dude, tilt brush is so awesome.
Yeah, he
Anybody
loved
who's listening, you've got to find a Vive and play with tilt brush.
Yeah, go to a Microsoft store.
They have them there?
Yeah, that's where we did it.
That's neat.
They had the HTC Vive set up, and they had an Oculus Rift set up. And he did Minecraft on the Oculus Rift, and then he did that on the HTC Vive. And he just loved it. You're basically drawing and doing art in 3D space.
Wow.
And it was really cool.
A couple hours in there easily just drawing. Because think about it, like you're standing in a space, in a virtual space, you can move around. So you could draw something, and then if you want to draw behind it, you just move your body and you turn around and you could draw something on the other end.
Yeah.
It's really kind of and the other thing that I thought was so cool about that one app in particular is that so you've got these controllers in your hands, and the all the angle and the momentum is tracked. So what you do is when one hand is going to be your brush, the other hand is your palette and your control, and you're kind of wearing this 3-sided glove where you point at it to select your brushes or change your tools. It was really a really great way to do user interface.
The HoloLens, that was a very cool experience, but the field of view is small. So the demonstration that I was in, it was at what's that thing called? It was here.
The thing downtown?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It's not Build, it's the other one. Ignite, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, that.
The Ignite conference. So they had these little rooms set up on the show floor that was set up like a living room, and that's where they had their HoloLens demos. And The problem was for some of the demos, I was too close to it. And because the field of view was so small, I couldn't see everything at once. So they had this really cool globe that showed up in the middle, and you could, like spin it and stuff. But it didn't fill up. It was too big for the field of view. I couldn't get far enough away from it to do, for it to work properly. But that type of technology, it was amazing how the virtual object, it looked like it was actually there. It was so good. And, you would move your head around and it was just perfect. It was that, to me, the technology that they needed to come up with to make that happen is impressive. And once they get the field of view, it's going to be really cool, the stuff that you can do with it.
Yeah, historically, I've been a console gamer, so I'm paying the most attention to HoloLens, because I imagine it's going to be directly working with the Scorpio next generation Xbox console.
Well, I don't think it'll be the HoloLens. I think it'll be those third-party headsets. Yeah.
Oh.
That's what I've been hearing on Windows Weekly and stuff like that and I know when they were talking about Scorpio, actually I was watching a video on the creators update, and they were talking about the new headsets that are going to work with Windows, which of course would also, if they're working with Windows 10 Creators Update, they're also going to work with the Xbox to do, look at objects in 3D space and that sort of thing and do 3D creation. And they mentioned that specifically. They didn't mention the HoloLens. So I'm guessing it's going to be, lower cost, third party, I'm plugging this into my Scorpio kind of devices rather than the HoloLens where all the computing and stuff is built into it, and it's kind of more expensive, at least for now, is my guess.
Yeah, and also the PlayStation VR. That's another one to track. I've heard, technically, as far as the power available to it as compared to the PC ones, it's not as great, but I've heard that it's good enough for, a lot of compelling gaming.
Yeah, because the idea with the Vive and the Oculus, you need to invest in a pretty powerful PC to make use of those goggles, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So your PC plus $850 kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like, wow, this Oculus Rift is on sale for $500. VR is fairly approachable, or is it?
And then you need to get one or if not two 3D cards.
Oh,
well, the
boy.
thing that's exciting to me is it's only going to get better and it's only going to get cheaper. And as long as enough people buy it so that developers will write software for it, then, we're going to have some amazing experiences within the next few years.
I'm pretty optimistic. I think that it's not going to go back in the bottle.
Yeah. I hope so.
We're way past what was the Nintendo one? Remember that?
Oh, yeah. The Virtual Boy, you mean from years ago?
Yeah.
The 3DS?
And then you had the glove.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going back quite a way.
All right, guys. I think we should go ahead and call it for the night. Thanks everybody in the chat room who kept us company at short notice, very short
notice.
We almost did not record tonight because we were like, we put this time aside, and all three of us were into it, and then we were like, but there's nobody here.
And Skype's not working.
Yeah, it's not the same. Well, anyway, I did the call on the chat room, and we had a good crew pop up at other people who had nothing else to do on a Friday night with us. So
Thank you.
We appreciate it, and thanks a lot, Tim. And
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll have you back again sometime.
Nice to meet you.
You too. Thank you. Yeah, I'll come back anytime. This was fantastic. I appreciate it.
All right. Good night, everybody. But Jonathan, what are you up to, man? I haven't talked in a long time.
Yeah, it's been crazy. We haven't talked in forever.
Well, this used to be the reason and the excuse that we would talk every week,
Yeah, exactly. I tell you, though, ever since Teresa stopped scheduling for us, it's been kind of, hit and miss ever since then, which is too bad.
Yep. I know what you mean. So we did have another one. We're working on with Josh Atwell.
Yes. You know what else we should do?
A date. I don't remember.
I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
I'll look that up. You talk. You were talking things.
But the guy who's doing the stuff for Visual Studio Code, and
David Wilson.
David Wilson. Yeah, we need to have him back on because there's now an interactive console for Visual Studio Code, and that thing has gotten much more compelling in the last couple months.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. It is
We'll have to have him back.
in most cases a viable replacement for the ISE now. For actually doing development real time, where you're running snippets of code and going back and forth in a way that it didn't have that functionality before. So
I could go there.
Yeah,
all right, cool.
It'd be good to have him on if he has the time.
Maybe Teresa can come out of retirement.
That would be awesome.
All right, cool. That's the plan. We're gonna have Josh Atwell on at some point, and then maybe we'll get David Wilson on.
Yeah, we had a request too from Aaron Nelson for a SQL guy because I know that there's a lot of news on the SQL front recently.
All right, cool. Well, you heard it here, guys. We have a plan for actually continuing to do a few shows now and then. Maybe not every week.
Oh yeah, happy 10-year anniversary.
Yay!
Wow, that's quite a record. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and sign off, get back to my wife, who was like, I thought we were going to watch a movie tonight. So,
Same here.
All right.
All right, good night,
everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Good night.